When you get to be a certain size, and I'm specifically talking about weight, not just being a big human being with a lot of height, people start suggesting gastric bypass, or you start reading about it, or the crazy surveillance, social media surveillance system that always seems to be listening to our conversations and knows exactly what to serve us in the form of ads or content that they suggest. You start seeing a lot of suggestions about gastric bypass. And I guess if you're here, you probably know a little bit, or at least have heard of gastric bypass, and it's that it's not just a single thing, but there's a combination. It's a bunch of different surgeries that one can do to basically reduce your stomach. I'm simplifying a lot, but there isn't a single procedure. There's a gastric sleeve, gastric bypass. A bunch of different ways that this can go. Where the point is basically to reduce your stomach so that you feel less hungry and you eat less, and therefore you lose weight. And I have considered this in the past. I even, a couple of years ago, went to an info session. It was I don't want to call it like a seminar, but almost. It was like a presentation done at, I believe, a hospital in Georgetown. Can't remember if it was at Sibley, maybe. Basically a hospital in Washington, D.C., and it was like a whole info session about gastric bypass, the options that you have when it comes to gastric bypass, what are the benefits, what are the risks. They even had a person who had gastric bypass successfully, and they had her come and talk to us and sort of explain her life and how things had changed, how her process had been. And I really have considered it in the past without really, I don't want to say that I'm an expert, obviously. I feel like maybe I do know very little in terms of the medical aspect of it, I guess. But I have considered it for myself and have tried to be as conscious and as mindful as I can in order to really be able to make that decision for myself. And so here are a few things that I have considered and how that has impacted my decision not to do gastric bypass in the past, and I'm not really considering it for real at any point. When it gets suggested to you or me or any of us, at least in my experience, it has always been from someone who maybe isn't fully aware of everything that gastric bypass entails. And of course they're doing it from a place of love or concern, but it's always coming in a sense of like, I know someone who did it and had great success, or I had, I heard about this thing, it could really help you. And it isn't like, it normally isn't like a doctor or someone who really knows the whole thing coming and telling you, I think you're a good candidate. But for the most part, for most of us, it's always been someone with perhaps limited information who's suggesting it to us. And it almost makes it seem like, like you try as hard as you can, but if you can't, there's always gastric bypass. And it almost feels like it's supposed to be this silver bullet, this magic pill, this thing that like, okay, well, if you can't seem to do it on your own, then let's go ahead and do this. And that's it. It'll solve all your problems. And one of the things that I found early on when I started doing this research for myself is that it's definitely not that. It is definitely not a silver bullet or a magic pill that is just going to solve all your problems for you. It is a very drastic measure that it's taken as a sort of last resort, almost. I feel like that it becomes that, where, because with any kind of surgery, there are always going to be risks, right? And on top of that, this is a very invasive, technically, they do now do that type of surgery, laparoscopy, I think what's the word is. By the way, sorry about all the noise. I'm currently in Buenos Aires, and there's a huge protest going on today, so sorry if there's like a lot of noise in the background, but anyway. So basically, they can do this surgery non-invasively, like they don't have to split you open and all that. They can go in with like just a couple of different points and take care of it, with very small incisions. I'd probably need to get one of my siblings to explain the surgical portion of it. But it's not invasive in that way, but it is significant in the sense that it is, depending on what you're doing, removing a significant portion of your stomach, and I think that the sleeve is a smaller portion, and the bypass, it's a bigger portion. And in a way, you're altering the way your digestive tract, your digestive system is designed. You're physically altering the way that it works. And it's meant to do that because the risks that are always going to be associated with something as major as that type of a surgery, outweigh the benefits of having it outweigh the risks. Your life is already at such a high risk from all these other conditions, comorbidities or morbidities, that doing something as major as gastric bypass, even though it's risky, is going to give you more benefits, or the benefits that it'll give you will outweigh the risks. And so, as I started thinking about it for myself, there were a few things that I considered. First, I am very overweight. I am in like obesity class 3 or something. I'm very obese. Medically speaking, I'm very obese, weight-wise. But then, as we start looking at my labs and my blood work, I am healthier than my body suggests to the naked eye, basically. And so, I am not diabetic, and as of very recently, I'm not even pre-diabetic. So technically, I'm at the moment not at risk of diabetes. My lipids are a little bit high, or they're not in a great place, but not as bad as perhaps they should be based on my weight. And so there are, my blood pressure was a little bit high, and it's now being managed now that we're, doing a little more exercise, eating a little bit better, and doing a little bit of meds. And so it's not out of control. So as I was considering all of these things back when I did this seminar, this info session in DC, all of these sort of health markers were even in a better place than they are now. And so thinking about it in those terms, I wasn't at as great a risk as perhaps some of the other candidates who were there that day in terms of, okay, like, it is risky, but otherwise, things can get much worse. And so that was one thing. But the other thing that was very significant for me that really had, the biggest impact when it came to making that decision is that it is not going to change your mindset. And yes, it can have a physical effect on hunger, especially if you're removing certain parts of the stomach that create a certain hormone. I can't remember at this point the specifics of that. And so it does have an impact, but it won't change your brain. It won't change your direct relationship with food. And there's a big psychological aspect to having gastric bypass that, if it's not assessed and managed properly, can even have negative effects. Like, the surgery can have negative effects on the mental health of a patient. And that was something that they were very, what's the word? Adamant, or very clear about that. They were clear about the fact that, there are certain psychological evaluations that have to happen before you're fully consider a candidate. And that was most concerning to me, because at the end of the day, I have a physical problem, but it is as much a mental problem, a mental health problem, as it is a physical problem. I have an addiction, to food. I have an eating disorder. It's a psychological thing. And so simply going and getting gastric bypass is not going to take care of that. It never was, and they were very clear about that. It's never going to, it can help, and of course, there's always going to be, like, if you have gastric bypass, you're always going to be a gastric bypass patient. It's not like they let you go, There are a bunch of things that you need to do, like checkups and all that stuff, but also you're supposed to go and have psychological support for the process, because it is aggressive, it is a very aggressive change. And so the idea of knowing that I wasn't in the right place mentally, and unless I was able to sort of deal with that, get that in order, it was going to be very difficult for me, even after having the surgery. And so we're trying to improve quality of life. We're not trying to just save your health at all costs. And that was probably going to be a very difficult thing for me. Also, interestingly enough, if I'm able to take care of that mental health aspect, the food addiction, the eating disorder, my body does respond to healthy eating and exercise. It does respond to that. I'm not one of those people who, regardless of what they do, they just can't seem to, lose the weight. My body does respond to it, and if I'm eating healthy and if I'm exercising. And so it's always been, it felt like gastric bypass wasn't going to fix the main issue that was keeping me, and that in a way still keeping me overweight. And that is my mental health, my relationship with food, my eating disorder, if you will. And I really hope that, there are, I guess, more severe eating disorders like anorexia and bulimia. It's not that, but obviously. But, and so I hope that, if you have one of those conditions, you're not offended by me calling this an eating disorder, maybe because it's not, I don't know if it's classified as that medically, but I'm using it as a way to highlight that there is an unhealthy relationship with food, and something that feels mostly 100% emotional. And at this point, it's created an addiction that, there's the mental health, psychological aspect to it, but there's also now the physical sort of addiction to sugar and, all of that stuff. And so I just wanted to put that out there as a disclaimer and hope that you're not offended by me calling it that. And so it just felt like there wasn't, in a way, there still was hope for me to address these changes myself, and the fact that gastric bypass wasn't going to address them for me anyway. And they even said, I remember at that session, that you have to get started with losing weight and demonstrating that you can have that you can maintain a healthy diet, and that you're exercising regularly, because these are things that you're putting yourself at such risk by having gastric bypass, that if you can't prove that you can do that after the surgery, you're just not a good candidate. And for me, it just felt that if I was able to do that, get myself to a place where I could show that, where I could prove that, and my body was responding to it naturally, I wasn't a good candidate. And there was no need for me to do something as drastic as that, because there still was hope for me, because I still needed to address the real issue, the real culprit behind this. And so after leaving that session was the last time that I fully considered it, that I was considering it enough to go to an info session like that. I realized that it's not what I thought it was. It's not going to be a silver bullet magic pill type thing. There's a lot of work to be done beforehand, and the work that needs to be done before becoming a serious candidate for gastric bypass includes a set of psychological aspects that were the very culprit of my obesity, and still is, and is something that I could work on myself, because just having gastric bypass wasn't going to solve it, and basically that's why I decided not to do it. And we're still struggling a little bit, of course, but it's all coming back to that idea that I've been talking about for the last few days, which is the mindset of we need to get very clear about what it is that we're doing and why we want to do it, and start doing the psychological healing that needs to happen, the psychological work, the mental health work that is required to be able to, basically, in its most basic form, reestablish a healthy relationship with food. And that is what we're working on. That is more important than, exercise or, the nutrition, obviously, but none of those things can happen if we can't get into the right mindset and do the work that needs to be done psychologically to be able to become a healthier person and overcome that addiction, overcome that eating disorder, and just become a healthier person, not just physically, but mentally. And at the end of the day, that's really what we want. So if you were considering it, I recommend that you start by looking at that. Of course, do your own research. I am not a medical expert, and even medical experts, don't just seek out one opinion, because at the end of the day, we can all be wrong, even if we're experts. But don't ignore the psychological aspect of it, and don't just focus on the idea of doing something that can take care, an action that is outside of your control, like, someone, doing gastric bypass surgery, as a way to deal with something that is in here, because only we can fix this, or and I don't want to say it fix in a negative way, but only we can really improve our mental health. and other things will sort of start falling into place. But we can't really move forward unless we have health up here. So thank you guys for hanging with me again today. I'll see you tomorrow.